You know, some memories don't fade even when you beg them to. They stay, replaying in your head like a bad movie you can't turn off. Mine begins on a cold evening in December, standing in front of a restaurant I couldn't even afford to park near. It was my sister's engagement party, the same sister who hadn't spoken to me in years. Stay with me till the end, because this story still makes my heart ache, and if it touches you in any way, just remember to leave a little love. It helps more than you know. When I walked into that bright, loud room filled with perfume, diamonds, and people who had never worked a double shift in their life, I already felt out of place. My dress was old but neat, my shoes borrowed from a friend, and the gift in my hands, a set of engraved wine glasses, had taken me 3 months of tips to afford. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd smile when she saw me. But the moment Caroline spotted me, her perfect smile faded. She looked me up and down like I was dirt that had slipped in through the back door. "Oh, Hannah," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Sorry, this table is for rich people." She pointed toward the corner near the trash bins, where a few empty chairs sat by the kitchen doors. I froze, thinking she was joking. But she wasn't. Laughter from her friends followed, quiet but clear. I wanted to disappear. Every eye in that room felt heavy on me. My fingers tightened around the wrapped box until the paper tore a little. I thought about turning around and leaving, but something inside me, something tired and small, told me to stay. I walked to that table near the trash, sat down quietly, and smiled like it didn't hurt. From there, I watched her glow in her designer dress, laughing, posing, pretending she didn't grow up in the same tiny house I did. She called her new life hard-earned. I almost laughed. She had earned it, with lies, manipulation, and money she stole from me when Mom and Dad passed. When the waiter came by, he looked confused. "Miss, are you sure you're with the party?" he asked gently. I nodded and said, "I'm the sister." He gave me a look, the kind that says I'm sorry, and walked away. I sat there for an hour, pretending to enjoy the scraps left on the buffet, before quietly placing her gift on the table and leaving without saying goodbye. That night, standing outside in the cold, I made myself a promise. Caroline might think I belonged near the trash, but one day, I'd make sure she saw exactly what she'd thrown away. That I still remember the day Caroline took everything that was supposed to be ours. Back then, I thought losing money was the worst part. I was wrong. Losing trust hurts deeper, and it never really heals. Growing up, Caroline was always the golden child. Mom said she had a gift for charm, but really, she just had a gift for taking credit for everything I did. If I baked cookies for the church sale, Caroline handed them out and smiled for the pictures. If I saved up for a school trip, she somehow ended up going instead. I told myself it didn't matter, that family shared everything. But when our parents died, I learned just how wrong I was. They left us a small inheritance, not much, but enough to start over. I planned to pay off our debts and fix the roof of the old family home. Caroline said she'd handle the paperwork since she knew people at the bank. I trusted her. Weeks later, when I went to check the account, it was empty. My name was gone from the documents, replaced by hers. She said it was just a clerical error. By the time I realized what she'd done, she was already engaged, wearing diamond earrings I'm pretty sure she bought with that money. The debts came after that. Bills, credit collectors, threats, all in my name. Caroline had used my information to take out a small loan for family expenses. I nearly lost my apartment trying to pay it back. I started working double shifts at a small diner on the edge of town, flipping burgers, washing dishes, pretending to smile for customers while I felt like my whole life had been stolen. Nights were the worst. I'd come home smelling like grease and sweat, staring at the cracked walls of my apartment, wondering how the same parents could have raised two people so different. I tried not to hate her, but it's hard not to when every scar on your life traces back to someone you once loved. Then one afternoon, while serving coffee at the diner, I overheard a familiar laugh. Caroline. She was sitting at a corner booth with two of her friends, bragging loud enough for everyone to hear. "Lucas's company made a killing last quarter," she said, swirling her drink. "And trust me, if anyone asks, the books are clean, at least the ones they're allowed to see." Her friends giggled. I froze. I didn't know much about business, but I knew when someone was hiding something. Caroline always played with fire, lies, fake receipts, and shortcuts. But this time, it wasn't a family secret or stolen cash. This was bigger. And for the first time in years, I didn't just feel pain. I felt a spark. If she thought she could keep winning forever, she was wrong. I finally saw her weakness. And this time, I wasn't going to let her bury me again. When I first saw Lucas again, I almost didn't recognize him. It had been nearly 7 years, but some faces never fade, no matter how hard you try to forget. He was standing beside Caroline at the engagement party, holding her hand, smiling politely as guests congratulated them. The same man who once promised me the world was now promising it to my sister. I felt my stomach twist when our eyes met. For a second, everything around us disappeared. The music, the laughter, the clinking glasses. He looked startled, almost guilty. I quickly looked away, pretending to admire the flower arrangements. Caroline didn't notice. She was too busy showing off her diamond ring. Back then, Lucas and I had kept our relationship quiet. We were both young and still figuring out life. He was kind, patient, and the first person who ever made me believe I was worth something. He used to drive me to the lake on weekends, where we'd talk for hours about our dreams. He said he wanted a simple life, one filled with love, not status. I believed him. Then one day, without warning, he stopped calling. When I showed up at his apartment, his roommate told me Lucas had moved away, engaged to Caroline Merritt. I remember that day vividly. Caroline had just come home, pretending to comfort me. "I'm so sorry, Hannah," she said, "but Lucas told me you were seeing someone else. I guess he found out before you could tell him." I had stared at her in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" I'd asked, but she only shrugged and smiled, that cruel, practiced smile. Later, I found out she had shown Lucas fake text messages she created using my old phone. Now, years later, watching him stand beside her, I saw something in his eyes, confusion, maybe even regret. He couldn't hold my gaze for long. Every time I moved, he looked away. During the toast, when Caroline leaned in to kiss him, he hesitated for a moment too long. And that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. He didn't know the truth. That realization hit me harder than anything. For years, I'd carried the pain of being replaced, believing Lucas had chosen her over me. But maybe he never did. Maybe Caroline lied her way into his life, just like she lied her way through everything else. As I stood in that crowded room, something inside me began to shift. I didn't need to scream or fight anymore. I just needed patience. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that lies always find their way to the surface, especially when you give them time. So I smiled politely, raised my glass, and toasted to their happiness. Inside, I made a silent promise. I wouldn't ruin her life with noise. I'd let her destroy it herself, piece by piece, that I didn't plan to see Lucas again. At least, that's what I told myself. But a week after the engagement party, I found myself sitting in the corner booth of Maple and Main Cafe, the little coffee shop near his office. It wasn't stalking, not really. I just wanted to see if the look in his eyes that night had meant something. The first morning, he walked in wearing a navy suit, talking on his phone, distracted. He ordered his usual, black coffee, no sugar, and sat by the window. I pretended to read a book, but my hands trembled around my cup. When he finally looked up, his eyes landed on me for a moment. I gave a small smile, nothing more. He hesitated, then nodded before turning back to his laptop. That was all I needed. Over the next few weeks, I kept showing up at that cafe. Never at the same time, never sitting in the same place. Sometimes he arrived before me, sometimes after. I never forced conversation. I just let him notice me. The same way truth works. Quietly, steadily, until it becomes impossible to ignore. He started saying hello. Then one morning, he sat across from me. "You still take your coffee with too much cream," he said softly, a faint smile on his face. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt like old times slipping through the cracks. We talked for half an hour, about nothing important, just life, work, memories. He didn't mention Caroline, and I didn't ask. I wanted him to remember me as I was, not as the villain my sister made me out to be. At the diner where I worked nights, things went on as usual. I wiped tables, filled coffee cups, and tried not to think about how tired I was. That's where I met Eli Thomason, the new line cook with tired eyes and a sharp mind. He was older, maybe in his 40s, and he had a habit of writing numbers on napkins during breaks. One night, I asked him what he used to do before this. He smirked and said, "I used to make rich people richer, until they made me take the fall." We talked more after that. When I mentioned the Hartley name, his head snapped up. "You know them?" he asked. I nodded, careful. He sighed. "Lucas's company. They're moving dirty money through fake real estate deals. And guess whose name is all over the papers?" My stomach dropped. "Caroline," I whispered. He nodded slowly. That night, walking home under flickering streetlights, everything became clear. My sister had always been greedy. She'd taken my money, my trust, and even the man I loved. But this time, her greed had tied her to something much bigger, something illegal. And maybe, just maybe, I could use that. For once, her own lies were about to do the work for me. When Lucas called and asked to meet, I almost said no. My first thought was that Caroline had sent him to scare me off, to warn me to stay out of their lives. But his voice didn't sound angry, it sounded tired. Just dinner, he said quietly. To clear the past. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small steakhouse on the edge of town, the kind of place with dim lights and slow jazz playing through old speakers. When I walked in, he was already there, standing up as I approached. For a second, I saw the boy I used to love, the one who brought me flowers from roadside stands and laughed at everything I said. But then reality settled in. This man was about to marry my sister. We sat across from each other, the silence heavy between us. The waiter came, we ordered, and for a while we just talked about harmless things, work, old memories, the city. But when the food arrived, I couldn't pretend anymore. You said you wanted to clear the past, I said softly. Maybe it's time you knew what really happened. Lucas frowned slightly, setting his fork down. Hannah, if this is about... It is, I cut in, steady but calm. You think I cheated on you. But that was never true. Caroline told you that, didn't she? He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. She showed you fake messages, I continued. She made sure you hated me before you ever heard my side. And while you were walking away from me, she was already planning how to take what our parents left behind. She forged my signature on the inheritance documents. Every cent you two built your life on, that was supposed to be mine too. Lucas stared at me, the color slowly draining from his face. That's a big accusation, Hannah. Caroline wouldn't. I reached into my purse and slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a notarized copy of the original will, the one Eli had helped me recover. My name was clear, the signature lines altered, the dates changed. She would, I said quietly. She already did. He picked it up, scanning the papers with trembling hands. His lips parted, but no words came out. The waiter came by to refill our glasses, and neither of us moved. When the waiter left, Lucas just sat there, staring at the documents like they were something poisonous. I didn't come here for revenge, I said after a moment. I just wanted you to know the truth before you marry her. He looked up at me, eyes full of something I couldn't name, guilt maybe. Regret. I stood, grabbed my coat, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, I turned back once and said, "Now you know what kind of woman you're marrying." Then I left him there, sitting in silence as the truth finally began to sink in. The invitation came 3 days before the event, wrapped in gold paper and sealed with the Hartley family crest. I knew it wasn't meant for me. Caroline would never allow my name anywhere near her perfect little world. But it was addressed to Ms. Hannah Merritt, printed clearly in bold ink. Lucas's assistant must have done it on purpose. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fate. Either way, I decided I would go. That night, I stood in front of my cracked mirror, wearing a simple black dress that hugged my frame just right. It wasn't expensive, but it looked timeless. I did my hair, put on a shade of lipstick I hadn't worn in years, and took a deep breath before heading out. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth finally standing up in the light. The banquet hall was breathtaking. Chandeliers glimmering above hundreds of guests, tables dressed in white and gold, a jazz band playing softly in the corner. Caroline had outdone herself. She was in her element, moving from group to group, laughing too loudly, her diamond earrings catching every flash of the cameras. No one could tell that her entire empire had been built on lies. Not yet. When I walked in, heads turned. I saw her smile freeze for a split second before she forced it back into place. "Hannah," she said, her voice too sweet. "What a surprise." "I was invited," I said simply, showing her the card. She blinked, speechless for a moment, then waved a waiter over as if that would make me disappear. But I didn't leave. I found a quiet corner near the back, where I could see everything without being seen. As dinner began, Lucas looked uneasy. He kept glancing at Caroline, then at the crowd, as if waiting for the right moment. When he finally stood to give his speech, the room went still. His voice was calm but cold. "Before we celebrate this union," he began, "I think there's something everyone deserves to know." Caroline's smile wavered. "Lucas, this isn't." He held up the documents. These are copies of an inheritance file, forged signatures, false witnesses. All tied to Caroline Merritt. He turned toward her, his eyes full of disappointment. You told me your sister was bitter because she lost everything. You didn't tell me you were the one who took it. Gasps filled the room. Someone whispered her name. Someone else dropped their glass. Caroline shook her head frantically. That's not true. He's lying. She's lying. But before she could say more, an older man stepped forward, Mr. Hartley's personal lawyer. I've seen the originals, he said quietly. They've been verified. Caroline's face turned pale. Lucas set the papers on the table and walked out without another word. Cameras flashed, guests whispered, and the perfect night she had built so carefully began to crumble around her. I didn't need to stay to see the end. I slipped out into the cool night air, the sounds of chaos fading behind me. For the first time in years, I felt something like peace. The days after the engagement party felt strangely quiet. It was all over the news, local realtor's fiancé accused of fraud. Hartley engagement called off amid scandal. Every headline carried Caroline's name. Every article painted her once glamorous life in shades of shame. I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth had done everything for me. I tried to stay out of it. I still went to work, poured coffee, smiled at customers, and pretended not to hear people gossiping about her. But part of me couldn't help feeling a twisted mix of satisfaction and sadness. She had humiliated me for years, lied, stolen, broken me down until I had nothing left. And now she was the one falling apart. It should have felt perfect. Instead, it just felt quiet. A week later, she showed up at my apartment. I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who once walked around in designer clothes now stood in my doorway wearing a plain hoodie, her eyes red from crying. Hannah, she said softly. Please. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You forged my name, Caroline. You lied to Lucas. You made me the villain in a story you created. She swallowed hard, tears spilling over. I know. I was stupid. I wanted a better life. You don't know what it's like trying to keep up with people like them. Please, Hannah, you're my sister. You're the only one I have left. I looked at her for a long moment. For years, I'd dreamed of hearing her beg for forgiveness. But standing there, watching her crumble, I didn't feel the victory I thought I would. I just felt tired. You only remember we're sisters when you're losing, I said quietly. Go home, Caroline, wherever that is now. Then I closed the door. That same night, Lucas called. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. I owe you an apology, he said, for believing her lies. I never stopped thinking about you, Hannah. Not once. I didn't know what to say. The part of me that once loved him wanted to forgive, to believe we could start over. But the woman I had become knew better. You don't need to apologize, I said finally. You just needed to see the truth. He sighed. I guess I did. Still, I'm sorry for what you went through. After that call, I stood by my window for a long time, watching the rain hit the streetlights. I wasn't seeking revenge anymore. I wasn't seeking love either. I just wanted balance, the kind that comes when justice finally breathes. By the end of that month, Caroline had lost everything, her house, her friends, her reputation. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need to destroy her. Life had already done that for me. The smell of warm cinnamon and baked bread filled the small corner bakery as sunlight poured through the window. The little gold sign above the door read Heart and Crumb, a name I chose to honor both my parents' memory and the lessons they'd left behind. After months of legal battles and quiet nights of doubt, I'd finally reopened what they had once built with their hands and hearts. It wasn't a palace or a mansion, but it was peace. And for me, that was enough. Eli came in carrying a box of supplies, flour dusting his dark shirt. You're booked solid for next weekend, he said, setting the box on the counter. People are obsessed with your apple turnovers. I smiled faintly, tying my apron tighter. Guess people like a little taste of home. He leaned on the counter, eyes soft. You've come a long way, Hannah. I nodded, looking around the bakery, the wooden shelves, the pastel tiles, the photos of my parents on the wall. It's strange, I said quietly. I spent years chasing revenge, thinking it would make me feel alive again. But standing here, I realized I just needed to build something good from all the bad. The bell above the door chimed. I turned, expecting a customer. Instead, it was Caroline. For a moment, I couldn't move. She looked nothing like the sister I'd known. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, her confidence gone. She clutched a folded piece of paper in her trembling hand. A resume. Hannah, she began, voice barely audible. I heard you reopen the bakery. I stood behind the counter, hands resting on the worn wood. I did, I said flatly. She took a hesitant step forward. I've been looking for work. No one in town will hire me. I thought maybe you could, her voice cracked. Give me a chance? The silence between us felt heavier than flour in the air. I remembered every insult, every cold glance, every lie she'd told. I remembered how she laughed when I was broken. And now here she was, asking for a job in the very place my parents dreamed of, the place she once mocked. Eli glanced at me, waiting for my response. But I just looked at Caroline. You destroyed everything once because you wanted to look rich, I said softly. Tell me, Caroline, do you even know what honest work feels like? Tears filled her eyes. I do now, she whispered. Please, Hannah. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just a chance to start over. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I walked to the back, grabbed a clean apron, and handed it to her. You'll start tomorrow, I said. But here, everyone earns their bread. As she took it, crying silently, I realized justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about letting someone need their own redemption, one loaf at a time. The smell of roasted coffee and freshly baked bread wrapped the bakery like a warm hug that morning. The sun spilled through the front window, painting gold across the wooden tables. One of those tables, by the trash bin in the far corner, had once been mine. Years ago, when I was scraping by, serving coffee to strangers, and pretending not to notice my sister laughing with her rich friends at another table. Back then I was invisible. But not today. Caroline, table 3 needs wiping, I said softly, not unkindly. She nodded without meeting my eyes, grabbing a rag and walking toward the back corner. Her movements were quiet, deliberate. No arrogance, no sharp perfume, no diamonds glinting under the lights. Just a woman doing honest work, one wiped surface at a time. The other employees knew who she was. They whispered at first, how the once glamorous Caroline Hartley now cleaned tables in her sister's bakery. But after a week, the gossip faded. She was just another worker now, trying to earn her way. As she bent to clean near the trash bin, a memory flickered through me. The day she'd told me that table was for poor people. I'd stood right there, tray in hand, my heart cracking in silence. And now, watching her shoulders move in quiet rhythm, I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. Eli came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. She's still here, huh? He murmured, nodding toward Caroline. Yeah, I said. Shows up on time. Doesn't complain. Maybe that's her way of trying. He smiled faintly. You've got more grace than most people would. I looked around at the bakery, the line of customers, the sound of laughter, the smell of sugar and hope. Grace is the only thing that makes revenge worth surviving, I said. The bell above the door jingled. Lucas walked in, his usual easy smile fading when he noticed Caroline cleaning the floor. He looked at me, hesitated, then approached the counter. Morning, Hannah, he said softly. Place looks beautiful. You did it. Thanks, I replied, sliding him a cup of black coffee. Same as always? He nodded, glancing back toward Caroline. She didn't look up. She's really working here? He asked quietly. Yes, I said. Everyone deserves a job, even when they've lost everything else. He studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. You've changed. I had to, I said simply. Pain forces you to grow up. When he left, I stood at the counter, watching the world move beyond the glass. For the first time in years, my heart felt steady. Caroline straightened up from the corner table, her eyes meeting mine across the room. There was no hate in them now, just understanding. I gave her a small nod. That corner table, once my shame, was now my victory. Not because she worked there, but because I didn't have to anymore. The rain tapped against the bakery windows like a soft rhythm, steady and calming. The day had ended hours ago, and the streets outside were slick with silver light from passing cars. I stood behind the counter, wiping down the same wooden surface I had polished every night for the last few years. The smell of cinnamon and butter still lingered in the air, the kind that stayed even after the ovens cooled. Caroline was stacking chairs in the corner, her movements slower now, more careful. She wasn't the woman she used to be, the one with diamond earrings and a voice sharp enough to cut through a room. Life had stripped away the shine, leaving someone smaller, quieter, but somehow more real. Storm's getting worse, she said, glancing at the window. Want me to lock up? I shook my head. I'll finish. You go ahead. She hesitated, her hands brushing crumbs from her apron. Hannah, you sure? I smiled faintly. Yeah, I've got it. For a moment, she just stood there, the sound of rain filling the silence between us. Years ago, silence from her had meant judgment. Now it just meant peace. As she turned toward the door, I called out softly, Caroline. She stopped, looked back. Her eyes, once full of pride, now held something fragile, like glass that had cracked but hadn't shattered. You were right once, I said, leaning on the counter. That table near the trash? You said it was for rich people. Her face tensed, guilt flickering across her features. Hannah, I lifted a hand to stop her. You were right. It was for the rich. I just had to learn what rich really means. She blinked, unsure whether to smile or cry. And what does it mean? She whispered. It means peace, I said quietly. It means sleeping at night without wondering who you hurt to get ahead. It means having something that can't be taken, because it's not in your hands, it's in your heart. Her lips trembled, and she nodded slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. She didn't try to apologize again. Maybe she knew that words couldn't rewrite what was already done. When she finally stepped out into the rain, I watched her walk away under her umbrella, the streetlights reflecting off the puddles like pieces of broken gold. I turned back to the bakery, the hum of the refrigerator, the flicker of the neon open sign now half-lit. I took the rag and wiped the counter one last time, moving in slow, even circles. It wasn't just a counter anymore. It was a reminder of everything I'd cleaned out of my life. Every lie, every betrayal, every piece of pain that once defined me. As the storm rumbled outside, I felt nothing but calm. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't waiting for karma or revenge. I was home. Do you think Hannah did the right thing by choosing peace over revenge? Or should she have made her sister feel the pain she once did? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really love to hear what you think. And if stories like this touch your heart, make sure to subscribe, like, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one.